So maybe that wasn't your favorite video. I don't know. But we've got 2 weeks of material to reflect on, but also 30 weeks. I know it's 29 and 30 together, but remember we met a week before we met a week. So this is week 30. So the table is open for what's on your mind and heart in these readings or otherwise.
Don't everybody speak at once.
Well, I liked it.
Say more. What did
That I really knew.
say? What did you appreciate about it?
I thought it was a good presentation, believable to think about how it will be, could be. And I like that you tried to do here to make it more like me when it can be later. Be a better Christian and ways to do it. You liked it? What
Yes.
is-
Well, for me, and I've brought this up before, I was raised Catholic and attended Catholic school. So what it did to me is we returned to those times with the nuns. When I was in school for 8 years with them. And they were very much teaching us and training us to preparation in that kind of way. Yeah, for the eternal life. And it was not for something frightening or scary or ending, but rather, it goes through life and then that enters into another life. And so it was, I thought maybe it sounds corny, but to me, I mean, my saying this, but it was very moving and good. I liked it fine. It was not bored.
It's not scary,
Oh, no,
no
not at
fear.
all. No, not at all.
It made me sad. Because I've been listening to the news, which is sad.
Yeah,
And it caused me to think of that 16-year-old who just knocked on the door
oh,
and was
Okay.
shot twice. And I thought, if we could only bring some of that eternal beauty and love and kindness now to today on earth, what a wonderful thing that would be. And I just feel like there's so little of that around. I've really been thinking about that young man and all the future he had and the promises he had, and he was just trying to pick up his little brothers and got to the wrong house. And
Susan?
Yeah.
There was yesterday, a couple girls in the car and they got into the wrong driveway. The guy came out and shot the 20-year-old dead.
where was that?
They hadn't even gotten out of the car.
They're just
Was that
turning
here?
around.
Boston?
Someplace there.
This is yesterday.
Did you know
And
that?
yes, and not to counter that story, I had a friend who I went to seminary with. She's now 44. She had 3 kids. Last year, she ran her first marathon ever. The week before the race, she was carjacked and shot with a bullet, shot, and she ran the race anyway. Here in Houston, she ran the Houston Marathon, first one. She said, "I'm never doing it again." Now, I don't know if you know anything about running. Her first marathon ever, she ran in 3.5 hours.
Wow.
So she qualified for Boston, but she said, "I'm not doing it again." She ran Boston yesterday in 3 hours and 13 minutes.
Oh, my
And
God.
so I hear, like, I cannot believe she was carjacked. The person tried to kill her. She ran that race anyway. And in some ways,
Well-
that makes her running of the race even more beautiful as a triumph after adversity.
Yep.
It's not more beautiful, it's just, you appreciate that there's a little more going on than even the average bear. Not that somebody who just trains and runs a marathon and does great is any less,
Right.
but the sort of the ugliness and the response to it somehow makes the beautiful thing even more beautiful.
Mhm.
Well, and it expresses hope in the future as well.
And resilience.
Yes, resilience.
And I think part of the story, the reason I share the story is it is true that terrible things happen and wonderful things also happen. You know, and so like, I do think sometimes we can look at a terrible thing and have despair. Or we can say the terrible thing is terrible. I'm not going to take that away. And yet there still is beauty even in the tough things.
Along the same line, I had problems with the statement she made. There will be no pain or sorrow or whatever in heaven. There will be nothing that separates us from God, such as pain or sorrow. My experience is that the suffering that I've been through has been a connection, has opened a more deeper connection with God. And so it can separate us if we allow it to, but if we look for the opportunity in it, there's the resilience there too.
Yeah. And I do wonder, I think sometimes we use words so interchangeably that we forget why English has 550,000 words, because they're not meant to be interchangeable. Pain and suffering seem like very different things to me. Pain is very natural. It's your body saying, pay attention. Animals have pain. Do animals suffer? I don't know. Suffering, I think, is when we internalize the pain and just stew over it. Will there be pain in heaven or whatever? I don't know. Probably there won't be suffering. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
It's very Buddhist.
It is
yeah.
very Buddhist. And yeah, I think the difference between Buddha, right? And maybe Buddha is like right about this. Hey, like the cause of suffering is desire or attachments. And if you get rid of desire, then you don't suffer. But maybe it is like our attachments to outcomes that create suffering, whereas we should be attached to hope. Qualities. I think a lot of people will be very disappointed when they die that it is not like what they expected. I don't know if that makes sense.
Do you think animals have suffering because they have attachment to their people?
I think they
And when there's
sometimes
a
do.
separation
Yeah.
from their people,
Yes.
they could suffer.
This one suffers terribly from separation anxiety. Although I'm not sure she suffers from the idea that when she's wounded, she might die or limp the rest of her
Right.
life. I don't think
Right.
she suffers that. I
Right.
think she's just like, my paw hurts. So I'm just gonna like walk more gingerly instead of like, oh my God, maybe this is cancer. You know,
Right.
that's what we do. That's not necessarily what they do, but I do think animals do suffer some because, whew, yep, there she goes right now. Now she's suffering. You took your hand off. Or maybe she isn't suffering. Maybe that was a signal. Pay attention to me. I don't know.
You know, to me, even infants, we've all experienced infancy and children, your children or someone else's children, they're very tuned in to how connected you are to them, or they're tuned in to knowing what they need.
Yeah.
And letting you know, even if they're not talking and saying it in sentences, but babies let you know what you need and what
Yeah.
they need.
Well, and I do think okay, so just about this topic about things being in both hands at the same time. I was talking to a couple yesterday whose young child wants to be treated as a non-binary. This is my first time doing this.
Wow.
Particularly with a kid that's like 9, wants to be called they, them. Now, part of the friction is we always worry for our kids, but honey, like people will treat you differently. That will be so hard, right?
Right.
This is what we do. We want to protect them. And, you know, within the family, like one set of grandparents is like, this is probably just a phase. I hope it doesn't go anywhere, but okay, fine. The other one was like, no, we are not doing this. and has doubled down on calling the kid by the gendered pronoun to like stamp it out of them, right? And so, like the parents, like, what do we do with our parents? And it's sort of like, well, I didn't know what you do, but like, I'm glad you're going to therapy to get some more strategies, but I don't know that you need to protect your kid from this struggle. I think it's okay to say, sweetie, you're 10, you're 9, whatever you are, and we accept you who you are. We're going to make mistakes. This is what you want. So I'm going to honor calling you they, them, because that's what you want. That's just to show you. I don't understand it, but it's what you want. That's what I'm going to do. And be prepared that other people are not going to be able to do that. That doesn't mean you bow to their wishes. You just need to know some people won't be able to, and you probably will never convert them. So how you carry this is going to be really important. I don't think you're exposing a child to trauma to tell them that. I think you're telling them this is reality,
That's what the world is.
right? I think most psychologists, a lot of times we try to save our kids the struggle instead of saying, this is going to be a struggle. And I'm going to learn with you and from you along the way. But just know, I'm here with you. And this can be hard.
I'm just amazed that a 9-year-old knows what binary is.
And of course, a 9-year-old isn't linking it to their sexual orientation. That's what we do. That's not what they're doing, right? And that's what we start to do with suffering. We start to say, well, today you're non-binary, tomorrow you're going to be gender queer, and what will we do then?
I'm not quite sure I understand non-binary.
Non-binary is, instead of calling me he, him, or in calling Graciela she, her, like, hey, I feel like that constricts my identity. So please call they, them, or we, us.
It's embracing both genders.
Yeah. Now, this
In
can
one-
sound really nuts because, again, we conflate that with sexuality, and that's not a necessary thing. But I would tell you, most people I know are gender nonconformist, strictly speaking.
So wait a minute, slow.
Because gender is a social construction. I don't mean their genitals are binary, right? Those are different things. Birth, sex, and gender are different things. So in a gendered construction, the way my dad grew up, you don't change a diaper that's women's work.
Oh,
So I agree with that.
In the gender construct, my dad grew up, and we're not even thinking that long ago, men didn't cook, they worked, and when they came home, dinner was to be on the table.
That's right.
So a man 50 years ago who cooked dinner for the family was gender nonconformist.
Right.
Oh, no, he was totally a man. That's not what that means. Was not conforming to social roles about what genders do and what they don't do. I'm gender nonconformist. I shop, I cook, I clean, I take my kid to school, I make sure she does her homework. My wife is stereotypically masculine because she goes to work and dinner's on the table at 6. You see how this goes. We're cisgender. I have no doubt that about my birth sex, I embrace his, he, him very well. And I'm also aware that I don't conform to traditional gendered patterns about what men do and what they don't do.
But don't you think you and your generation most men do what you do now?
More men
More
do
men.
what I do. Most still don't.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, I sometimes, don't take this the wrong way, but I do like love being a man, very happy in the male body. And I have a hermeneutic of suspicion for many men. Sorry for saying this. I think most men are assholes.
Oh, and I have a hermeneutical, what?
Hermeneutic of suspicion.
hermeneutical suspicion.
Yes. It is very rare in my experience that women are entitled to grab a man's behind.
That's true.
It is not rare that men talk about women as objects. I have a hermeneutic of suspicion when a man talks about a woman as an object. So I'm very comfortable being male, And I'm not comfortable with that gender permissiveness to sow wild oats, to talk about people as objects, to touch other people without their permission.
And they don't feel that it's okay for women to do the same.
Of course, it's not. That's not what women do.
Right.
This is where non-binary comes from. Non-binary comes from, I don't like the permissiveness or the relegation. It has nothing to do with my physical apparatus. Now, it can cross over. And all I want to say about this is that it does include, like, I'm really glad I'm a man. I mean, I am, and I have grief about what other men do. And I think this speaks to, there's beautiful things and there's ugly things.
That's
I think she's got it.
He agrees.
She's
Yeah.
got it.
You can speak out, speak your mind.
I don't know how we started talking about binary things. I'm
Yes.
sorry. A non-binary.
I just have to say one thing.
Please,
My doctoral dissertation was looking at women and their identity, their gender identity, not sexual identity, but gender identity. And relating that to their mental health and their ability to achieve. The thing I want to share is that the research shows that if you identify more non-binary, if you identify with both typically societal male traits and female traits, if you're blended, you're more healthy mentally than if you're male or female, you know.
Mhm.
So, and you can see my biases by how I portrayed the
Yeah.
two.
Yeah.
But it's a healthy thing. We think about it as being, oh, it's terrible, but it's different, that we're finally embracing that we can be a mixture. We can be assertive, but we can be gentle. You know, we can be achieving and work outside the home, but we also can love homemaking things too. We don't have to be either or.
Right.
I remember when Dwight Judy was alive. I mean, Dwight saw himself as a very strong man. And he portrayed himself that way. And he was a little bit of an asshole, honestly. But he did all the cooking
Uh-huh.
and he enjoyed it. He loved cooking. It brought him pleasure. And yet he did not see what he did as a female trait.
Right. Yeah, and it's like those funny things. The way men cook is they barbecue and women are bakers.
Right.
Unless they're really good, and then only men can be really good bakers. Like, this is the weird, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, this is that weird thing,
Pastry chef.
right?
The chefs,
Yeah.
right, you know.
And I think, I know sounds really nuts, but I want to connect it, that it seems like a tangent, but this is about a little bit more of eternal life is not being relegated to a particular posture. It's about being open. And there is some nonconformity going on, right? And this is where I think it's interesting. When she talked about time, I was talking to do you know anything about quantum mechanics?
Yeah, sort of.
I think it's easier to believe in like Hindu religion, which is wackadoo, than quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics is the craziest thing I've ever heard, right? But at the quantum level, there is no differentiation in time between past, present, and future. That is so weird, isn't it? Because we think it's time as an arrow and it's linear, but at the quantum level, it isn't. Time is blended. Experience tells us so, right? Like, again, in the therapy, there's the 90-10 rule. You're mad at your kid because their room's clean, like not clean, you're really mad. 90% of that is probably microaggressions over the last 15 years. Only 10% is the room itself, right? Usually think about getting mad at your kid. If you could just separate the one incident, it was no big deal. But God, you've been doing it for years. 90-10, right? So at least the past and the present, we do often blend. But I would say the future too, and that's kind of what she talked about, is that eternal life doesn't disavow the past, but doesn't live in it alone. Holds on to a future of transformation And those two meet in the present moment, right? I think so. Seems interesting. Because we're talking about eternal life, the book mentioned this. I used to teach geometry, right? And there's like, this is so weird. That's a segment, right? It has limited length. It has a beginning and an end. Doesn't matter how long it is, it's finite. I mean, you could make it infinitely long, but it's finite because it begins and ends. That's a line, extends forever in both directions. That's a ray. It has a beginning, goes forever, or it has an end, but goes the other way, right? Which one's longer? A line or a ray?
Line.
They're both.
They're both infinitely long.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
Now, I know what you're thinking. You need two of these to make one of those. Right?
Yes.
But infinity is infinity. I don't know if you know this, mathematically, there's this kind of weird guy who says there's levels of infinity. Did you study this? Tiers of infinity?
Levels of infinity?
Yeah,
Perhaps start what you're talking about.
turns out because he was a Jewish mathematician, tiers of infinity are represented with the Hebrew character aleph. They're called aleph sets. So this one's infinitely long, but it's infinitely shorter than this one. Now that is so weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because they're both infinitely long, but you can tell clearly it takes two of those to make that one. Hence, this is of level 2 and this is of level 1. Do you know how many numbers there are between 0 and 1 on the number line? There's an infinite number of numbers. So think how many more infinite numbers there are between 0 and 100.
Oh, my.
They're both infinitely long, but there's infinitely more. That's why he came up with these ideas. Now, I only say that because this is all nonsense. It's not linear and it's somewhat linear. So when we talk about eternal life, we just got to be honest, it isn't linear. It's weird like this, levels of infinity. And I don't know if you picked it up, but you know what we say, the Lord be with you and also with you. It's careful crafting. We don't say the Lord is with you. We don't say the Lord was with you. We don't say the Lord will be with you. What we're saying is the infinitive. We're saying all three at the same time, which is why we say it in a grammatically incorrect way to represent past, present, and future all at once as somehow a quality of eternal life. That is to say, our past is reconciled in God's future, and we get to live into that in the present.
But how do we say that? Yeah.
The Lord be with you.
The Lord be with
Grammatically, we should say the Lord is with you,
you.
right? The Lord be, like to be. Reminder that God's name in Hebrew is being, past, present, future, and all modalities. So this is part of eternal life, past, present, and future somehow integrated. This is another one of those images for the Trinity. The Creator, that's in the past, right? Or maybe the Creator's making things new. I don't know. Sustainer keeps it going in the present. Redeemer brings back the past, right? So new things coming, old things redeemed. Here we are in the way, right? These are modalities, but they give us this idea that hey, God is non-linear.
And you can't get there just one way.
No, and I think there's also this reminder that we do things sometimes that are not linear. Like we do things that are apparently going to fail because we understand that hope is indeed effective.
Mike. If when we die and we go, we don't go to heaven, we come back to earth sometime in the future. If we don't have some memory of life on earth, then I'm not sure that it's life after death.
So it's a great question. Is memory what makes us human?
There you go.
Because some people say it is. I don't know the answer to that question. I was talking, sorry.
You start out, as man evolved, developing a brain, then they develop some things to comfort themselves. One of them being religion. Okay, so when you die, is that the end? Back to ashes? There is no. This is more of a comforting thing.
Yeah. Well, it's even more basic than that, right? Your average human being on the planet has an adverse reaction to a snake.
That's odd and
Because early people have this, this is really weird. How do you pass on a memory? Apparently we can do that. Snakes aren't inherently bad, we know that. But there's like research behind this. That in general, people are averse to, like the red flag goes up with a snake. Somehow that's been passed on genetically.
Yes.
Even though it's an awareness, it's not a physical trait. It's interesting, isn't it?
So,
is it
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So if you put a baby with a non-lethal snake, would the baby be going mad because it slithers and,
Apparently not.
okay,
You'd like to think so, but the research indicates apparently not.
okay.
Apparently they have,
Not what,
they don't delight with the slithering snake.
As they do with a puppy or a
Yes,
kitten or.
or a fake snake, because babies know the difference between toys and animals.
Yes.
well, is the
Makes sense,
fear of snakes anyway connected with Genesis?
I think Genesis explains something that is hardwired for another reason.
Okay,
We're afraid of snakes because they can kill us.
well,
They don't all, of course. And we're overly afraid of snakes. Most snakes just want to get away from you.
that's
Right.
right.
So we have these cute rhymes, red and yellow, red and black, friend of Jack, red and yellow. You know, the way it should go is red and black don't touch snakes, right? This is like, you don't judge a snake as safe by how it looks, you just don't touch them. This is part of our human hardwiring, actually. Now, how that got passed down, because that's like a knowledge piece, not breathing. I don't know, but the research suggests it does. So this is part of memory. In that there is something like corporate memory.
I think when you were talking about women and being submissive and male trying to dominate, I think that passed on to where it eventually is believed. And most women are short selling themselves because they got a lot more.
Now, that one, I don't know if we're born into or if we're born into immediate socialization to, right?
Because, and that can change dramatically.
We hope so.
Yeah, that
Well,
can
it's changing slowly.
Pardon me?
It's changing slowly.
Yeah,
Well, I guess I'm thinking from personal experience in that I was brought up in a very traditional home, you know, as a Hispanic woman, you did what men did this and women did this. But I was able to, by high school, but I must say this, my dad was very Hispanic, but he was very open about how he treated his daughters and what he expected from us as girls. It was different. And now when I say different, that sounds weird maybe, but from the typical Hispanic male in South Texas, he was more open-minded about that belief. So I don't know where I'm getting with it, but
I think you're taking us to the final chapter, right? Which is frankly, what we believe informs the way we live.
Yes,
And so the
right.
more we are
Mhm.
to things like equality and God's presence and redemption and beauty, even though there's suffering, the more we will see those things and enjoy them. I think that's the whole point of the book. every chapter.
I hear your snake story, and I wonder if it's what we really fear is what we don't know or understand or haven't become familiar with, whether that's a snake. Right, let me give you a recent example. After last Sunday, after Easter, we went out to eat. And this place, someone dressed up as an Easter bunny. We had to tell that Easter, my granddaughter went crazy
In fear.
in fear. Oh my gosh. So we had to tell the Easter bunny, don't come over here. Now, that fear would have probably subsided if we'd taken ahead of time to make her familiar with that. And even snakes, I wonder if that's not true. So I hear you, that it's crosses time boundary or something, but there are other explanations to that.
It does take work though. Consider something you're naturally averse to. It's not like you can just talk yourself into not being averse to it, right? This is why there's such thing as exposure therapy, which is you increasingly incrementalize yourself to being around the thing. For me, like roller coasters are not thrilling. I see a lot of ways I could get really hurt. I'm not so worried about dying. I'm much more worried about being maimed and hurt. And like, I am, it's honestly. So what I have to do in my brain is say like, boy, they would never assume the liability of me dying. That is a lot. So there has to be some safety, right? And hey, I get the physics of this. When I go climbing, it's really, for me, it helps to say this rope can support a semi-trailer. I weigh a lot less than that, right? I am not someone who enjoys heights. I'm not. But I'm able to trust in the gear. And that took exposure therapy.
Well, Mike, going back to the snake, I think one of the things is people, the general public can't tell the difference between the snake that's poisonous and one that's not poisonous. We don't have that with other animals. I mean, a bear or a lion. I mean,
They're pretty easy to tell that's a bear. Yeah. But we do have it with mushrooms. In fact, 90% of people who die from eating a bad mushroom are mushroom experts.
Oh, wow.
Really?
I knew there was a reason.
Because most of us know don't touch that, right? Better safe than sorry. But the mycologist says, I know what I'm doing, right? So they talk themselves into something they shouldn't have.
And take the story Susan related about the young boy knocked on the door twice and was shot. If I had to hazard a guess, the person who shot just didn't have a familiarity with someone of a different race and had fear. I'm not justifying what they did, don't get me wrong, but I mean, if we had grown up, because we grew up in societies that were segregated. And so we have a fear of what we don't know.
Was that a black-white issue? Because all I
Yes.
saw was,
Yes, it was.
And he was 84.
yeah, he was
Yeah,
84 and he was, no trespassing sign. I just think maybe he was a recluse.
Could have been, but then Tim has his own story too, I mean, was that a one of race? I don't know.
no.
It wasn't, okay. But somebody has a fear of something.
Yeah, I mean.
Well, the day
yeah.
before, there'd been those riots in Chicago.
Yeah.
So that was on his mind, and here comes someone that he doesn't know, and other 14,000 behind him coming to his door.
And do keep in mind that having compassion and giving somebody generous assumptions is not the same as justifying.
Right.
I can't justify that behavior, but I can have compassion for maybe it came out of a place of fear, or you've got this recent anchor of a riot. That doesn't make it okay. But if I categorically say it's because you're an evil man, I've missed an opportunity.
Yes.
And
So the
all-
man that shot was 84, that shot the
16-year-old boy.
but the child went to pick up
His twin brothers.
I was talking about. a
the
different
little
kind of-
children.
And it went to the wrong
Went to
house.
the wrong house.
He went to the wrong house.
I was talking about the guy that shot the woman in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
And
well,
he had signs posted all over about don't enter here,
Oh, okay.
all that sort of stuff. So I was thinking, it's a white guy shooting at a white woman who had basically nothing to do but come in there and was at the wrong place and backed out. Didn't even get out of her car.
Yeah, and somehow this is a natural fear I think all humans have. So when people say they're tolerant, because I lived in the Netherlands for several years, this is back in the 80s. And they said they're, oh, yeah, this is a very tolerant society. I looked at them and go, yeah, sure, you're all white, you know? And and so when then later in the 90s, the Turks started moving, you know, from Turkey, and their tolerance faded rapidly, you know. And so I think it's a matter of familiarity, you know, and that's just something we have to work on. I mean, you know, so if you think you're tolerant, well, just wait till a Martian shows up on your doorstep, you know, and go, you know, why don't you open your door to him, you know? Well, maybe I won't, you know, until you get familiar.
This is a big turn in the Episcopal Church, right? Because usually there's that sign, the Episcopal Church welcomes you. And the question is to do what? To do what we do? Or to be who you are and will accommodate that? So this is a question the bishop's spoken about, and I think this comes totally back to the book, so it may sound tangent, but I was at this road meeting. Bishop Doyle went to every convocation and had time with them last year. He called it the fireside chat on tour or something like that. We were down in Lamarck, and it's no mystery, Lamarck's a struggling parish. They got good people there. Of course they got good people, right? There's good people everywhere. But they're struggling. I mean, they can't really afford a clergy person. They've got a retired priest who serves them for a song, or they wouldn't have clergy. And of course, what they asked is, Bishop, how do we get more people to come to our church? Because we don't have a lot of young people. And the bishop said, why would anybody want to come to your church? What do you want them to do? Come pay for the lifestyle you enjoy? Or do you want them to come and you're going to accommodate who they are? It's a really important question. I just wish we had more young people. Why do you want them? Because they're the future. Because they'll pay the bills when I'm dead. Or do you want them, even though they're noisy and they write in the hymnals? Well, we don't allow that here. Then you don't want young people.
Right.
You want little people who have the same manners you have, but you don't want them. You want smaller versions of yourself. I think that's a really important question. Look, again, we told the story about the schizophrenic guy interrupted one of my lovely sermons, and it all went fine. And I also was like, God, I hope that doesn't happen every week. I'm just going to be honest.
Yeah.
I'm glad he felt comfortable, and I didn't want it to be every week. Could I have leaned into it happening every week? Maybe, I don't know. In some ways, I'm glad I didn't have to. And that says something about me. Is he really welcome here, or is he welcome to behave the way I expect him to? And what do we do with misbehavior? This is doctrines and faith matter. What kind of judgment is God going to get? You interrupted the sermon, pulling one of your rhinestones out of your crown. Or does the future inform the present? I was talking to the same person last week who works at NASA, talked about the time thing in general and quantum mechanics being all blurred. And look, I know this is going to sound loopy, but it was an interesting thing. Person I think believes in reincarnation. Believe in that if you want to. I don't know what I think about it, but person said, I just have this really comforting idea that we picked the life that we're living right now. So we chose our parents. This is really interesting. And you know how sometimes you get on, the person says, you get on a roller coaster and it's whatever, it's your pulse goes up and you sweat a little and it's a little uncomfortable. And then it's let's go on it again. And the person says, I think that's what this is like. I think it feels uncomfortable now because we don't carry all of our memories with us. We forget we chose this so that we could grow. And I thought that's just a really interesting thing that talks about time, past, present, and future all being blended. So it would be, I don't know if you buy the whole deal, but if you find yourself in a tough spot, you could say, my God, why is this happening to me? Or you could say, yeah, maybe I picked this. Maybe I picked this because I need to grow some eternally. That seems not bad to me, actually. You don't even have to do the whole reincarnation thing to say, this is really hard, and I got this chance to grow up right now.
Well, I want you to know that, last week, being a member of this parish and listening to your sermons really provided an opportunity for me to grow. I learned on Monday that my buyer was wanting to back out of the contract. And I was very upset, and I was very, very angry at her. Then I started to think, well, what would Mike have me do? Honestly, I'm serious. I didn't like being angry. And so by Tuesday, and I knew that she had this elderly mother in her 90s who's on dialysis. And I thought, okay, like the guy that cut you off in traffic, maybe there's something going on in her life that is causing her to impact my life. Not that she's setting out to do that, you know? And I started praying for her. And I wasn't angry anymore. I was still a little upset, but I wasn't angry at her
Right.
because that gave me an opportunity to grow and think about her as a person that was in a difficult situation, as I was a person in a difficult situation.
And in so doing, even though it was an inconvenience, she gave you an opportunity to grow.
Yes.
We usually forget that in the moment, but what if we had that awareness? Boy, this is really inconvenient, and it's my chance to grow. I didn't get to say, I said this at 8:30 or 8 o'clock Sunday, but I forgot to say it at 10:30. You know, there's that adage, hurt people hurt people. And so sometimes when somebody hurts me, it helps me to think it must be because they're hurt, or it could be. So instead of being mad, I could say, I could have a little compassion for them instead of just anger. And then the thing I forgot to say at 10:30 is, when we think about eternal life and living, when I find myself angry or saying, I'm sorry, but I stand by what I said, that's an opportunity for me to think, boy, I must still be hurt. I can't believe that came out of my mouth. That means I got some more work to do. Because that isn't how I want to end the ray. I want it to go forward, not stop here. So in that sense, right, and I'm trying to be positive because the negative stuff isn't working for me anymore, even though I still am saturated in it. Like, hey, I saw this ugly part of myself, so what can I learn? What can I learn and what healing do I need? Instead of, God, you're just so wrong. You're super obnoxious. Like, what's wrong with you? You know, there's people, and I don't think this is just me. There's people who you afford them multiple opportunities and they continue to like say or do things that bother you.
Yeah.
And then it'll happen the 15th time and somehow you're still bothered by it.
What
Right?
did you expect? Yeah.
What did you expect? And the real question is, they've proven that they are not somebody you can rely on to have an opinion of you that's worthwhile. So why does that continue to be shocking? That doesn't mean you discount them. It just means you experience the pain without the suffering.
You wonder, why do I expect them to change? Why don't I change? You know, why don't I
Yes.
get with the program?
Sometimes I don't even wonder, why do I expect them to change? Why do they keep coming back to me? I would just like them to leave me alone. But this is an opportunity to say, I can't control that.
Right.
So what am I willing to do? And how can I grow?
I liked what you said too about hurt people hurt people.
Mhm.
I have a situation in my family that just spoke to so strongly. And I thought about it all day after you said it. And now it's up to me to figure out how to approach that hurt person so they'll stop hurting others.
You know, we talk about this. When you were a kid, you learned sticks and stones to break my bones and words enough hurt, right? And we say that's a disservice to kids. It's not true. Words can hurt. But there is some truth in the statement. I choose to accept your words or not. I do have some choice, right? You can say what you want, but that doesn't, your definition of me is not necessarily binding. So there's some ambivalence in that phrase. In some ways, it can be very healthy. And this really good reminder that what you say might overwhelm somebody's capacity to be themselves. So be gentle, right?
And I can choose how to react to those harsh words. And when I choose to not react,
Mhm.
that gives me the power and
Yes.
takes their power away.
Mhm.
Right? Because they want you to react. They want you to be heard. And if you choose to not be heard,
Yeah. And I think probably the reason I was talking about this whole binary thing a couple of days ago is as an example, not just of like the way we talk, but how we do these things, is, you know, it just sort of occurred to me, talking to these parents who are very much wanting to spare their kids pain from the grandparents. You might tell the kid, it's not that your grandparents won't call you they, them. It might be that they can't. Now, you might think they can, but for whatever reason, they're not able to. That's just really a lot more helpful for me. Can't instead of won't. And then it reminds me, I may not be able to today, but how do I stretch into the ability? So this is going to sound silly, but when I introduce myself as Mike and you call me Michael, I'm not going to be happy with you. It's a courtesy. You call somebody what they want to be called.
Yeah.
Don't you think so? Yeah. I see the same with these words. You know, again, if I call myself Mike and you say, very Reverend Most Mike or whatever, I'll probably think you're joking because that's not how I introduced myself, right? And I might even say, you don't need to do that for me. If you need to do that for you, I can handle it, right? But I'm aware of that. So if somebody says, I want you to call me they, them, why would I not respect that? Well, because that's not the way I grew up. So what? Why do we hold on to that tightly? You know what I mean? I think the reason is because we tie it up with a whole bunch of other stuff it isn't tied up with.
But I think it's extremely controversial.
It's really controversial.
But I think that if you have a moral view, value system view, that something is not right, you know, who are other people to come in and judge that your view is wrong? You're telling us to be very accepting of them, but they're not accepting of us. And I'll give the example that's going to be very controversial. This transgender competing in women's sports really bothers me personally, because I'm one of those people in the 60s who fought for women's rights hard. And now, where are the women supporting these women? They're not there, in my opinion. I think that we ought to respect transgender people, but they need their own sports arena or whatever.
But you
know?
did such a beautiful thing there. We can respect them and
Yes.
also have standards about what fair competition is. Because we all get, if Lance Armstrong is juicing up on steroids or blood doping, that isn't a fair fight.
Right.
So we say you can't do that. So if you've got a ton of testosterone in your body, right? And you're competing against people who have none, that's like blood doping.
That's right.
Well, that's my opinion, but if you express that in some areas, you get.
But I can hold on to that idea and still call you they, them. You know what I mean?
Well,
I can call you what you want to be called and still not say, hey, like, you're a 300-pound bodybuilder who's now gonna do women's Olympic weightlifting. That doesn't seem like a totally fair fight.
No.
It's not-
And I get you wanna compete, and I can call you they, them, or she, her, and that doesn't seem fair to me.
Right.
But if I wrap it all up together, since that isn't fair, I'm calling you him against your will. I think we've gone a little far.
Well, I am not gonna agree or disagree, but I am gonna say that there are some people, I'm not one of them, but some people that feel very strongly you're a biological male or you're a biological female, and you can become whatever in your own mind. But if a biological male tells me I have to call him her, and I feel like that's a lie, I'm not gonna do it because I feel like you're a her, then is that person wrong?
I do know, and this is where I think it becomes really, really important. And I'm glad we're talking about a really controversial thing here at the end, because it is. And I'll say, I think probably people under the age of 50 have settled out that same-sex marriage, they take it for granted. That's all right. I really think so. I think we overcome that. Now, people over 50, I don't know if they have. I'm speaking very broad brush.
Yeah.
But I don't think we've done the same thing with transgender rights or, gender queer. I don't think we've crossed that. And so it is very controversial now, because I think the question is, many people ask, well, when does it end? And like you say, how do I include people who don't include me? I think that's a tough one. I'm willing to include you, but you refuse to honor me. So how do you include people who aren't inclusive? I think that's a tough call. I really do think it's tough. And so the question is, what does eternal life look like? What does it look like to include people who won't include you? And even though I have my own moral convictions, do you have to meet them to be worthy of relationship with me? I struggle with that. Because look, the way I grew up in youth group is one bad apple can spoil a whole bunch. Now, this is true with kids. We sweat about our kids' friends because we worry they won't be able to handle a tough influence. But at what point do we say, I trust you so much, you can convert them? Surely at some point, we want to get there where we can rub off positively instead of being afraid people will rub off negatively. I don't know when it is. And I think it's probably nuanced and different for everybody, but it does seem like a point of maturity that instead of being afraid you'll corrupt me, I'm hopeful I can support you.
Well, I think you can be accepting of people. You don't always agree, but you can be accepting of them. And when the problem comes in is when you can disagree.
Right.
You know, you can say, you're fine, I have no problem with you, but I'm not gonna agree with what you're doing. And then all of a sudden you become racist, biased, whatever. You get called all these names just because you don't agree, but you're accepting them.
It is really tough to think about, when is it enough? Is that okay to say? I think enough is the concern, right? How far am I supposed to go before I lose myself on your behalf?
Right.
I think that's what we're saying. And I think that underlies, frankly, a lot of life's tension. And how far do we love? And again, I was taught that there's a thing called tough love, right? So if your kid is doing something that's religiously not right, you shun them as an instrument to help them come to their senses and come back to you. Now you may say, Mike, I wouldn't go that far, but that is similar to that's a strategy for dealing with difference and accepting somebody who doesn't accept you or whatever. I don't think it's a healthy long-term strategy, but it's not foreign to any of us in the room, is it? You're well acquainted with tough love, right?
I don't see tough love, but you're speaking from the religious point of view. I have maybe a washed view of tough love. It's shunning is not acceptable to me in any form. but allowing the child to suffer the consequences of his or her behavior. Or saying, and one of the consequences might be, you may not do that in my home.
Right.
You're creating a dangerous situation in my home, so you may not do it. I mean, that's the ultimate tough love. So I see it as more, consequences, appropriate, logical or natural consequences, rather than shunning. I'm a proponent of tough love.
Yeah.
Uh,
Which is really, let's just call it boundary setting,
boundary
Yeah.
setting, yes.
which is very different from the ultimate boundary, don't call or come around.
Yes.
Right, that's
Yes.
an impermeable boundary.
Yes, yes. But shunning is not a part of that. I have to say, no shunning. I love you, but your behavior is not acceptable.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't
And-
know what to
and-
do.
Yes.
it's shunning, it's equally unhealthy to say, do whatever you want.
Mm.
So we live somewhere in the middle, and let's be honest, hopefully we learn as we go, who can handle how firm of a boundary, right?
I had some neighbors when we lived in Germany who both of them graduated from a very conservative Bible college. And they believed the word of the Bible was the word of the Bible. And one of the things they took from that was spare the rod, spoil the child.
Which is not in the Bible, but
Mhm.
it's in the Farmer's Almanac, but it is.
Yeah.
And they had two children who were adopted. And the oldest was a boy, and he was a very sensitive young man. The little girl was as hard-headed as could be. And they spanked both of them equally for things that they did wrong. And you could have spoken a harsh word to the young man and he would have been devastated.
Mhm.
And spanking the little girl
Did nothing.
did nothing, but if you took away a favorite toy or something like that, then that made, but they didn't do that. They did this spanking, and the young man ended up committing suicide.
Yeah.
And the daughter took off and was never heard of again when they got to be a teenager, so, you have to take each individual incident as an individual incident, and what works with what child, or in this particular situation, it was really awful to see. And I felt helpless to do anything about it because I could see what was going on.
We get some beautiful images. And sometimes it's just tough. I heard one this morning, if you didn't mind. This is from Martin Luther's childhood. So Martin Luther and a couple of his boys who were friends, were staring through a window at a butcher's shop. And they were clearly eyeing the sausages, right? And the butcher saw them and became very animated. And got some sausages and ran out the door, like almost like twisting these sausages in the air. So of course, the boys interpreted this as angry guy gonna beat us with the sausage, and they ran. And I guess Martin Luther figured out later, the guy saw they were interested and was excited to give them sausages,
Oh,
but they fled. And Martin Luther said this was his conversion to God. His primordial response was that God was mad and was gonna chase him. And God was chasing him to give him a gift.
Wow.
wow.
Sort of interesting, isn't it? Maybe it isn't the sausage, but one of the ones I grew up is God was always walking around with a notebook, good and bad stuff, right? So like, God, please, can I just have a break from that? Like, just a break, like Santa Claus. Instead of maybe God's got a notebook going, Just wonder what Herb's gonna do next. This will be interesting. I'm gonna take notes. I had no idea he was gonna do that in a very positive, curious way. But I don't mean that there's only two images of God, right? But those are two pretty extreme ones that we live in between. So what we believe probably does influence what we see and how we live. Do we chase people with sausages to beat them or to give them a sausage? I see you're interested here. And then we do live in the middle about how far do we go? What will you do? Just let's be honest about that.
This goes back to something that we discussed earlier. My dad was a graduate of A&M College before it was ever A&M University. And he was very proud of that. And we grew up with his pride. I mean, he would listen to the A&M ball games on the radio way back then. Well, my oldest daughter was accepted to Texas A&M University. Got her letter and he came over and I let him read the letter. His reaction was exactly opposite of what I expected. He went ballistic.
She's a girl.
He said, they're letting females into that college. It's gonna be the ruination of that
Oh,
school.
my God.
And of course, my daughter unfortunately was all proud. And when she heard her grandfather say that, whose poor picture we always had hung up in the house,
Oh, my
it broke her heart.
God. Absolutely.
And that was a big eye-opening thing for me.
Oh, my
I mean, we fought and fought to get girls admitted to
Yeah,
that
right,
school
right.
and to have equal status, which I think finally they do, but because they're letting them in the Corps of Cadets and all that. But it took a long time and he just was blasting it.
Mhm.
He was not proud of her. You know, he said she could have gone anywhere. She could have gone to U of H, she could have gone to Sam Houston. Why does she have to go there? And I mean, it took me a long time to get over that reaction. Very long.
I think that's a good cautionary tale when we find ourselves, I don't know how far to go on this one. At the end of your life, which way would you rather have been wrong? For being too accepting or not accepting enough? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. And being too accepting doesn't mean I give you all my stuff and you destroy it and burn it in the street. Doesn't mean that. It can. Our minds like to live in extremes, but it really can just mean, I don't even know what I think about that. It's not my experience at all. But I can do the work of calling you them if that's what you need. You know? I don't know.
And, yeah, we have to accept there's things we don't know and sometimes leave it at that, but, I don't know if you know, you don't read the New York Times. They've switched to, use of pronouns and also have another term for, it's not Mr., Mrs. or something, it's a gender
Yeah.
neutral but I'm reading the story and I'm not quite there yet, so I'm trying to figure out, well, who did what to whom, Because my pronouns, I'm getting mixed up, so, I'm working at it and,
It is hard because it's inconvenient. And I think I have to say, I get that like in language, I think is one of the ones that's really important now. Because there's this sad use of the word woke and it means positive or negative depending on who you are, right? And we talk about politically correct. But I was just ask you, if you knew that a turn of phrase would hurt somebody, why would you want to use it? I mean, why would you want to hurt somebody by calling them, I don't know, whatever it is?
And I don't have a clue as to what woke means.
It means you are not asleep to social justice issues.
Okay.
You realize that there is like some systemic not okayness and I can do something about it. Now, it can also mean overly fragile, liberal, whatever. And it's a way of punishing people for being conservative, for keeping their values. That's the negative nuance. I don't want to even defend the term. I just, when I think about it, right, like, yes, it is inconvenient for me to refer to God in the third person at all times. It's inconvenient because I grew up that God is he, him. You did too.
Yes.
That's,
Do I think that God is of a neutral gender? No. Do I think God has a gender? No. So why would I use a term that other people find exclusive when I don't believe God is male anyway? Why would I do it? Because it's easy. That's why I would do it. That's not a compelling argument for me anymore. You can think whatever you want about God. I don't need you to think that God is beyond gender, even though that's kind of what I think. I don't need you to think that. You can call God he, him in my presence. I won't get mad at you. I just know personally I don't want to do it. And the reason I don't is A, it will exclude some other people, but it will also bend my own thinking to privilege male things over female things. You don't even have to believe what I just said, but that's why I do it. I don't know if that makes sense. It is inconvenient because when you translate a psalm that says, I mean, I read one this morning, right? Normally it would say something like, God has spoken to us, and with the strength of his right arm, he will redeem his people from all problems. God has spoken to us, and with the strength of God's right arm, God will redeem God's people who has spoken to us. Feels really clunky. Feels really inconvenient. So what?
What about God the Father?
Yeah, it's a tough one. The only way I can do that is mentally, I have to say the pater familias is the one with the responsibility of ensuring that everybody in the family is well fed, educated, and taken care of. In my house, that was my mom. In some houses, that is the dad and mom alike. I know it's a gendered word, but I see it as a description of how God treats us. Now, you don't need to share my belief. You say father if you want to. I usually prefer to say something like parent, although I don't whip that out on Sunday mornings. Because when I say the word father, I mean it the way I just said, even though you may mean it a very different way. And this is why it's important. We can use the same language and be thinking of totally different stuff. We like to pretend that when we say the same words, they all mean the same thing, but that isn't true. This is part of eternal life, though. It doesn't have to mean the same thing. That's between you and God. What's between me and God is what I do. And hopefully, what we say results in how we treat other people. I'll tell you another bias. I meet clergy who say, I'm mother so-and-so, right? They're female clergy. I don't know how I feel about it.
I can tell
Well,
you I
you would
do.
call her mother so-and-so.
I'll do them what they ask, but like when we had a female curate here, I suggested, I think you should be Father Jenny. Because in my house, my father and my mother were very different people. And in some ways, calling somebody, of course, she's a woman and she's different from me being male. But the difference isn't because she's got different genitals, it's because we're different people. And what I see, this happened in the early 80s. People who didn't believe in female clergy, we call them priestesses.
Oh, no.
You didn't know this?
No.
Priestesses. She's the priestess at my church. They gendered it to diminish the person. So I don't know. I don't know. It's part of the reason I don't want you calling me Father Mike. Because I don't want Jenny to have to be Mother Jenny. Now, if she wants to be, that's great,
But
But-
if you don't want to call her that, should you have to call her that?
I called her Jenny. And I'm the employer, so I call her what I want. But I extend the same courtesy. She didn't have to call me. Now, if she'd said, Mike, I really need you to call me Mother Jenny, I'd have done it. But I said, Jenny, you call me by my first name, I'd rather call you by yours. When I'm talking about the bishop, I might say Bishop Doyle. When I'm talking to him, I even asked him, what do I call you? He said, you can call me Andy. Okay, but I will talk about him as Bishop Doyle to you all as a way of showing respect, right, for his position. But if I only call him Bishop Doyle to his face, I'm missing the person in front of me. And this is just the limits of language. I don't have a tidy solution. But I do think it matters because it reveals how I perceive him and interact with him and how we do all of that stuff. This is like where what we believe determines what we see and how we live. Father knows best. I know some things really well. I mean, really, like, I'm a pretty good speller. But it's not because I'm a priest. I'm just kind of good at spelling, right? We're setting ourselves up for major disappointment if we sit there and say that, right? We are.
You know, I grew up with nuns in a Catholic school, and they were sisters. It was Sister Mary Arthur, Sister O'Neill, and the priest was father. And I'm just thinking in the Catholic Church, I guess, they still do that in Catholic schools, or when they have the nun, it's still sister, and I'm wondering, because I have not been in one.
No, they do, and we still do it in this school.
Yeah.
I tell kids, I'm Father Mike, because it allows them to say my first name,
Yes.
but with a title of respect. I mean, I still call my Uncle Gary, Uncle Gary.
Yes, yes, yes. I
I'm
do too.
43, he's 70, but he's my Uncle Gary,
Yes.
and I'll address him as such. I don't ever say Gary, that seems tough, right? And I think the word father, in the way I'm using it, instead of father knows best, I do have this responsibility to take care of your comfort and your education and your quality of life. So that's a reminder to me, do that. I can embrace it that way, but father knows best de facto, I find that damaging.
We had a priest or he was a curate to start with, and then was ordained at St. James Conroe. And he said that he preferred to be called Pastor Kyle.
Mhm.
And that's what he went on to get his own church, and they call him Pastor Kyle at that church.
It's
Well,
inconvenient. So what?
What he wanted to be called.
Yeah.
So they're giving him that.
You know, Martin Luther changed his baby's diapers in the 1500s. Read the story today. In the presence of some theologians, baby soiled itself. Martin Luther said, what a pain it is to love you. And now I'm going to go do that. And that was Martin Luther's understanding of how God treats us. It's inconvenient to love you and clean you up. And this is what we do.
That is pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
I think it is pretty lovely.
Yeah.
And I think it hopefully brings all of this a little bit more full circle. I hope so.
Well, I just spent the last week, my daughter-in-law called Donna and I and asked her if we could come. She has 3 young children, take care of them while she went on a girls' night. And well, at first, Donna and I first thought they were both my son and my daughter-in-law both going, but turned out just my daughter-in-law, my son was there, and he can't take care of himself, so Don and I went, and she did the breakfast, cooked the breakfast, I cooked the dinners, I changed diapers like she did. So I've learned today, this makes me ginger what?
Nonconformist.
Nonconformist. Okay, so I'm gonna need some help in explaining this. And can one of y'all help?
I got it.
Explain I'm ginger
Hey,
non.
back in the old days, men refused categorically to do women's work. I happen to enjoy doing women's work. I do not conform to archetypes about what it is to be a man. And you love me because of it. That's it.
Well, my wife too, cause she.
Yep.
She goes out and plays golf while I stay at home. I don't clean too much.
She
And,
does a lot of
look,
the female work in the kitchen.
See, we might as well just be honest about it,
Yeah.
right? And look, I'll tell you, people will say, oh, don't you want to change my baby's diaper? Hell no. But I was never afraid to change my daughter's diaper. Now, that doesn't mean I actually, when it was change time, I would compete with my wife to do it before she did it. I mean, it was important to me to be the first one, not the, well, honey, if you don't want to, I guess I will, right? I considered it an honor and a privilege because there was bonding. Yeah, of course, it's gross, right? Will I change my mom's diapers if we get there?
Yes,
I don't know if she would let me.
if she doesn't know.
My
At
mom,
her age, probably not.
my mom decided to put my dad, part of why she decided to put him in a care facility is that, not that she wouldn't, she could not change his diapers. Now, she physically was able to, but emotionally, she was not able to do it. I don't judge her for that.
No.
She knew it. It's not that she refused. She could not because of what that would do to her relationship. I know she does not. This is so funny about my mom. Her sister just had a colonoscopy and it didn't go well. Doctor punctured the colon. And so sister's got to wear a colostomy bag, and it's sort of terrible. It's not as bad as we think, like, oh, you're less of a human being, but it can be very painful. The glue can hurt your skin, it can leak, and her sister was having a tough time, and here's my mom helping her clean and reattach the bag, and her sister said, you're doing a thing for a sister nobody should ever have to do. That's one way to think about our life, and I would say I think it's not the best way. If you'll let me, if you'll receive this gift from me, it is good for me to do this for you. I don't know what my mom will allow if we get to that point. Am I willing to do it? I'd like to hope so. But if she refuses to take it from me, I won't make her take it. This is part of what it means to respect each other's boundaries. Well, no, Mom, damn it, I'm going to change your diaper right now. Why would you do that to somebody who doesn't want it? And again, this is just way we show consideration. And we show consideration, I think, not just because it's nice, but because this is how God considers us. So the funny thing about church is that we so often think we all have to do it the same way, even though we know we don't do it the same way. So why would we think that God only does it one way? Ellen has different needs than I have, and Jan uses different words than I have. God's willing to be inconvenienced for you. Don't you think? Or at least I should tell you, I hope so. That's my understanding because it's beautiful. God's willing to be inconvenienced to love you. And I think that's a vision of what eternal life is. I mean, life that's non-terminal. I'm willing to be inconvenienced for the sake of life. I don't know what we're going to do next, but I just want to thank you for 30 weeks together with books and videos that we didn't always love, but with some that we often did. And for being willing to share your perspectives and to be vulnerable and not chase me out of here with a torch and a pitchfork. So thank you. You guys have touched my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.